I'm Nima Rajan. Canada and its allies are accusing Iran of snubbing the families of those killed when its military shot down a passenger jet 2 years ago. Canada, the United Kingdom, Sweden, and Ukraine have issued the joint condemnation. It comes after Iran ignored yesterday's deadline by the coalition of countries to negotiate a settlement for the January 8, 2020 disaster. 55 Canadian citizens and 30 permanent residents were among the 176 victims. Well, turning to Winnipeg now, where the police service has declared a state of emergency with 170 personnel booked off on leave related to COVID-19. The Edmonton and Calgary police services also warned of staffing challenges. This comes after a growing number of members tested positive or were in isolation. Ontario's GO Transit says staffing shortages are forcing a temporary reduction in some train and bus services. This while Quebec's health system is missing about 20,000 workers. Well, many provinces have delayed their return to in-person learning this week as the Omicron variant causes a spike in COVID-19 activity. Experts say getting students back in classrooms should be a priority as long as it's safe. Dr. Aisha Kurji, a pediatrician and assistant professor at the University of Saskatchewan, says kids have paid a huge price in the pandemic. She says children are still less likely to suffer severe COVID disease, but we have to be careful when case numbers rise so quickly. Alberta's education minister says students will go back to classes in person on Monday as planned. This comes as a dramatic surge in COVID-19 case counts has many other provinces like Manitoba and Quebec pushing in-person learning off until January 17th. Adriana Lagrange says it's important to balance the rise of the Omicron variant with health protections and the social and educational importance of in-person learning. Students and staff can expect more medical masks and COVID-19 rapid test kits. Scientists on the federal government's COVID-19 immunity task force are studying the extent of immunity found in people infected with the Omicron variant of the virus. Tests on donated blood have found that immunity against COVID-19 among vaccinated Canadians and those who have already contracted the virus has been waning throughout the population. But the head of the task force says the highly contagious new variant may offer something of a boost in immunity against future infection. Grocery stores are being urged to reinstate hazard pay for workers facing extra health and safety risks from COVID-19's Omicron variant. The federal NDP critic for economic development has written to the heads of Canada's biggest supermarkets, asking them to restore pandemic pay. Brian Massey, MP for Windsor West in Ontario, says supermarket workers are doing risky work during the Omicron surge and again deserve hazard pay for helping to keep stores open and shelves stocked. Statistics Canada says the country's merchandise trade surplus widened to $3.1 billion in November. This from a revised $2.3 billion in October. The gain came as total exports increased 3.8% to $58.6 billion. This is despite transportation disruptions caused by flooding and landslides in British Columbia. The fifth increase in 6 months came as exports of consumer goods were up 9%, mainly on higher exports of pharmaceutical products. Imports rose 2.4% to $55.4 billion. The City of Toronto saw records broken in home sales and prices in 2021. The Toronto Regional Real Estate Board reported Thursday morning that despite a nearly 16% dip in residential sales in December, a record 121,700 homes were sold through its MLS system last year. That was up 28% compared with 2020. The year's average selling price of a Toronto home also set a new record of nearly $1.1 million. Meanwhile, the National Housing Strategy has released a new report produced through its Solutions Labs program. It recommends a progressive surtax on homes valued at over $1 million as a strategy to cool the housing market. Generation Squeeze founder Paul Kershaw, who authored the report with input from 80 experts, says an annual tax between 0.2 and 1% could play a key role in reducing housing inequality. The federal government says it won't introduce a tax on the equity of primary residences in Canada, but is tackling skyrocketing housing prices in other ways. A roundabout in downtown Fredericton has been chosen as the International Roundabout of the Year. The United Kingdom's Roundabout Appreciation Society says Fredericton's Victoria Circle won for its aesthetic quality. All right, stay tuned. We have more news from around the world coming up next. Asian stock markets have followed Wall Street lower today after investors saw minutes from a U.S. Federal Reserve meeting as a sign that America's central bank might hike interest rates faster to cool inflation. Notes from last month's Fed meeting showed policymakers believe the U.S. job market is nearly healthy enough that ultra-low interest rates are no longer needed. Well, meanwhile, Shopify Incorporated is no longer the leading stock in Canada. The Ottawa-based e-commerce firm's stock price fell another 2.5% yesterday for a 13% drop in the year's first 2 trading days amid rising bond yields and interest rates. Meanwhile, the Royal Bank of Canada returned to its perch as the country's most valuable company. All right, well, joining us now to give us his outlook for investing in 2022 is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back.
Thank you, Nima. Happy New Year and happy 12th day of Christmas.
Happy New Year, Brendan. Now, it's the first week of January, and as you mentioned, a brand new year. So when it comes to investing, is there anything important that investors should do to prepare their portfolios for the coming year?
Well, I think that investors would not be doing the best thing for themselves if they react to arbitrary events like the turn of the year. They should do investing as a way that's going to actually serve their needs. They should think about what their needs are, what they want to achieve, and do it that way rather than saying, well, it's the end of the year, I need to do this, or it's the beginning of the year, I need to do that, or interest rates are definitely going up, or Omicron's definitely going to get worse. One thing we know about the future is uncertain. So people would do better, I think, to be more introspective of what they need rather than to focusing on external events about which we have no control.
All right, Brendan. Well, we do know that the tax season is coming up. So how should investors prepare for it? Should they maybe top up their RRSPs or sell stocks that have had significant gains?
Well, there's a couple of ways to approach it. So as you know, for the first 60 days of the year, you can make a contribution to your RRSP that can count toward your last year's taxes, that can count against your 2021 taxes. And contributions made to your RRSP are, if you have a big gain in something and you contribute that in kind, it is taxable, but it's taxable at the capital gains rate, which for the moment remains considerably lower than the regular income rate. So rather than selling a stock on which you have a big gain, you might want to look at offsetting the capital gains tax you might pay with the income tax you might save by contributing that to your RRSP, whatever stock you have a big gain on, whether it's Shopify or the Royal Bank.
All right, Brendan. Well, with the new year comes new investors. So any advice for them in terms of the best time to invest in 2022?
Today. Do it today. Now, hear me fully, though. You don't have to do everything today. If you are literally uninvested in the market and you just can't stand it anymore because the market's done so well all through COVID, then I would strongly advise people to do something. Not everything, but something. 10% of the total that you're going to do. So if you plan on investing, I don't know, $10,000, do $1,000 today, and then do $1,000 next month. Because if you do a little bit today, even if it's just $1,000, even if it's just 10%, the next right thing becomes easier. If the market goes down, you say, I'm so smart, I've saved 90% of my money and I can invest more next month. If the market goes up, you can say, thank goodness I've done something, we'll do a little bit more this month. So whether the market goes up or down, if you've done something, the next right thing becomes easier.
All right, Brendan, anything else that investors should look out for in 2022?
I think it's an interesting phrase, look out for, because all the things that we think are going to be causing issues, whether it's Omicron or rising interest rates, as you talked about in your introduction, all the things that the market has accounted for are probably accounted for. So the next thing that's going to make the market move either up or down is probably going to be a surprise and almost by definition can't be counted on. I think Omicron will probably work, or the COVID will work opposite to how most people think. Since this pandemic has been going on, interest rates have been very low. And as long as the pandemic remains forefront in people's brains, interest rates will continue to be low. I think the Federal Reserve in the US and central banks generally are going to be very slow to raise rates into the teeth of a global pandemic. Once the pandemic has subsided, however, interest rates might rise, and that probably would be the single thing that has the determining factor on interest on stock markets, because these stock markets have been so robust, at least in part, because interest rates have been so low.
All right, Brendan, some great insight there. Always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you. Have a wonderful 2022, Nima.
U.S. President Joe Biden and members of Congress solemnly marked the first anniversary of the insurrection on the U.S. Capitol today. The January 6th insurrection occurred when supporters of then-President Donald Trump pushed past police and broke into the Capitol to interrupt the certification of Joe Biden's electoral victory. Lawmakers held events today to reflect on the violent attack 1 year ago. But one expert says that January 6th should also serve as a day to renew the fight for democracy. Writing in The Bulwark, Professor Jeffrey Isaac says that while there is a time and place for reconciliation, the pressing need now is for American political leaders to counter threats to democracy. Well, with us now is Professor Jeffrey Isaac, political science professor at Indiana University, Bloomington. He was also previously the editor-in-chief of Perspectives on Politics, a journal of the American Political Science Association. Dr. Isaac, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Now, a very interesting article you wrote in The Bulwark. In it, you say that this is a battle for the future of American democracy, not a battle for the soul of America, as Mr. Biden has said previously. So what do you mean by that?
Well, first, I have to say, my piece was deliberately published yesterday. I thought the speeches by Biden and Harris today were absolutely terrific. I couldn't have written them better myself. What I meant, and I know that he spoke of the soul of America today, but what I meant yesterday, the purpose of that piece was to say that the events today should not focus on healing, but should focus on the democratic political work of defending democracy. So the point was, it's not a strictly moral and it's not a spiritual question. It's a political question, organizing citizens, emphasizing the importance of democratic legitimacy, and doing the work of changing the law to defend our democracy. So that was my point. And the rhetoric of the soul of America or the soul of the nation is fine in the way in which it was used today by Biden, which was in a speech that was very clearly political.
All right, Dr. Isaac, well, how should political leaders move forward from this in order to counter threats to democracy revealed by the January 6th insurrection?
Well, I would say two things. One is that unfortunately, and President Biden said this today in the speech, but many of us have been saying this very clearly for a long time, and the Bulwark in particular is dedicated to saying this. Unfortunately, one of the two major political parties in our system is firmly behind Trumpism. And with the exception of a few members who are either retiring or, in the case of Liz Cheney, being primaried by Trumpist Republicans, the Republican Party is not really interested now in defending democracy. So when you ask what should political leaders do, we're talking primarily about leaders of the Democratic Party, President Biden, Pelosi, Schumer, and then independents and some former Republican intellectuals and activists, like people associated with the Bulwark. But it's mainly the Democratic Party that has to do this work. And the work that needs to be done in the first instance is legislative work. It's gaining passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Enhancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. The Democrats need to pass this legislation, but more importantly, and some other legislation as well, the 2022 elections and the 2024 presidential elections are really, really important in terms of the future of democracy. So passing voting rights legislation and electoral fairness legislation is very important, but equally important is mobilizing citizens and convincing a broad swath of the American public that democracy needs to be defended. And that means not electing Republicans who really are trying to erode and attack democracy.
All right, Doctor, just about a minute left here, but taking a look at the American citizen's perspective, recent polling shows that Americans are split over the nature of the events of January 6th, especially along political lines. So what are the implications, if any, of this situation?
Well, the implications are very serious. And, they've been pointed out by many people. A Canadian political scientist, Thomas Homer Dixon, published a piece recently that's gotten a lot of attention. He simply said what lots of us have been saying, which is that kind of the soil for authoritarianism is deeply embedded in American culture. The fact that so many people along partisan lines are willing to accept lies and conspiracy theories is very, very dangerous. It means that the challenges are very great. I don't think a majority of people are in the camp of authoritarianism. And I think it is important to mobilize supporters of democracy and convince independents that it's important for them too to support democracy. But it's a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge. It requires political leadership, and it also requires a dedicated commitment of activists and citizens.
Some insightful remarks, Dr. Isaac. Thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you so much. I appreciate what you've done. Thank you,
sir. All right, we'll be right back after the break with a look at stories making news around the world as Australia and Japan sign a landmark defense agreement. That and more coming up next. The leaders of Japan and Australia have signed a landmark defense agreement that allows closer cooperation between their militaries. It is seen as a rebuke to China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met in a virtual summit to sign the Reciprocal Access Agreement. It is the first such defense pact signed by Japan with any country other than the United States. The agreement follows more than a year of talks. It breaks down legal barriers to allow troops from one country to enter the other for training or other purposes. Well, meanwhile, China's foreign minister says his country will appoint a special envoy to the Horn of Africa region. That's where Ethiopia and Eritrea have been fighting forces from Ethiopia's Tigray region. Meanwhile, Somalia is in the grip of a political crisis caused by a long-delayed election. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi announced the position while visiting Kenya on Thursday, but didn't say when an appointment would be made. The announcement came as the United States Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa is again visiting Ethiopia. Authorities say dozens of protesters and 12 police officers have died during violent demonstrations in Kazakhstan. Government buildings were stormed and set ablaze, while over 350 police have been injured in the escalating unrest. It poses a growing challenge to authoritarian rule in the Central Asian nation. The president has requested troops from a Russian-led military alliance called the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Sudanese security forces have fired tear gas to disperse crowds. This comes as thousands took to the streets in the capital of Khartoum and other cities once again to protest the October military coup. Activists posted live videos on social media of Thursday's rallies. Social media also swarmed with images showing tear gas clouding rallies in the capital, along with protesters hurling stones and throwing back empty gas canisters at security forces. Sudan has been politically paralyzed since the October coup. Turning to France now, where regulators have fined Google and Facebook a total of more than 200 million euros. This for not making it as easy for users to opt out of online tracking as it is for them to accept it. The data privacy watchdog says that while the companies gave French users a single button to immediately accept cookies, there wasn't an equally simple way for them to decline, which means they weren't freely giving consent. Cookies are used to target internet users for digital ads. The Swiss Army has told its ranks to stop using foreign instant messaging services like WhatsApp, Signal, and Telegram for official communications. They are instead opting for a Swiss alternative. This in part over concerns about U.S. legislation that governs how American authorities can access information held by tech companies. In a letter last month, Swiss Army leaders called for use of the Swiss instant messaging service Threema. A promotion for the service was posted December 29th on the Swiss Army's Facebook page, which, like WhatsApp, is owned by the U.S. company now known as Meta. One of Portugal's leading media conglomerates says a group calling itself Lapsus hacked the company's online services. Grupo Impresa said the attack was aimed at disrupting the company's services and sending fake news messages to subscribers, but that the hackers did not demand any payment. The hackers gained access to the company's Amazon Web Services account early on January 2nd. The company regained control later that day. Impresa said that it had no evidence that they accessed subscribers' passwords or credit card details. The incident is under investigation by authorities. South Korean presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung isn't bald, but he is enjoying the support of many bald voters over his push for government payments for hair loss treatments. Since its proposal was disclosed this week, hair loss has emerged as a hot-button topic ahead of March's presidential election. While online communities for bald people are voicing their support, others criticize the proposal as a populist attempt to win votes. Mr. Lee, an outspoken liberal, is leading public opinion surveys, and reports say 1 in every 5 South Koreans suffer from hair loss. Prince William is appealing for innovators around the world to submit nominations for his Earthshot Prize, which is aimed at finding new ways to tackle climate change. The prestigious prize was launched in 2020 and is inspired by U.S. President John F. Kennedy's 1962 moonshot speech that challenged Americans to go to the moon by the end of the decade. Each winner will receive a grant of £1 million to develop and scale up their ideas. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada.